How a Romance Novel Saved the Galaxy by Ariana de Rate. Chapter 85. Epilogue. Mandalorians. Sutra heard the sounds as if from far away. She raised her gaze, away from the cooling pauldron, blinking at the after-image from the glowing Beskar. Ah, right, the party to celebrate Padawan Kiro's successful bird gotten. Zia declared it official, gifting Kiro a second vambrace to match her burrs. Then the whole group had headed out to the party, and Z had gotten distracted by putting the final touches on a pauldron. Z preferred to be on the outside of such gatherings, but Z wasn't the misanthrope Armorer Nee was, and should at least make an appearance at the party. She grabbed a pad of flimsy. Z said hello to the Mandalorians she met on their way through the party. It had spread out to cover the entirety of Little Guild Abbey at this point. He spotted several Jedi in the crowd, almost always too surrounded by Mandalorians for her to approach, but he caught Mace's eye and nodded a greeting. Obika was not visible, probably off somewhere playing with the other Attica. Z was probably getting ahead of herself, but Z had a whole set of tiny, intricately designed Beskar beads ready for the boys' next Padawan milestones. If Stingy Nee was going to steal all the base armor crafting from her, Z was at least going to outfit her Jedi lovers and in style whenever she could. She found the ladder she was looking for and climbed up to a nearby balcony, which allowed her to survey most of the party from a second-floor view. Sutra pulled out her pad and started drawing. There was a Jedi Knight Z didn't know using the Force to hold 3 balls just out of reach of 2 grinning toddlers. Z hoped the Knight let them catch them soon. Z knew for a fact that the Zabrak toddler would bite to get what they wanted. Next, Z spotted Brila and Master Thilza. Brila was being her usual exuberant self, but Sutra was moved to draw the joint hands between the more reserved Jedi Master and her Mandalorian. She suspected their wedding was not far off, considering Z had heard from Mace that the council had decided it didn't go against Jedi laws. Harder to capture due to the angle where the etiquette of Padawans playing in the courtyard to their left. The Jedi wisely still didn't allow initiates into the area, but Padawans were known to be already adopted. Z smiled at the ball stopping directly in the end goal Z could see, and then drew the figures arguing over whether the Force had been used or not. Her gaze wandered again. There, she drew the regal Master Galia, the beads of sweat on her brow, the only sign she was struggling with the spice in the tea she was eating. Here was one of the older bird flirting hopefully with a possibly oblivious Master Senube. A Rodian Jedi was chatting familiarly with a Mandalorian and his ad, who were showing off some hollows that Z was too far away to see. It was a pleasant way to pass the time, though soon the smells of spice and roasted meats penetrated through their focused drawing. Z paused, losing the thread of what Z was drawing, as their stomach gave a growl. Sutra looked up. Deep within the crowd, she spotted Mace. Their eyes narrowed in on the gloved hand being run suggestively over Mace's gorget. Standing, Sutra put her pad aside and went to rescue her lover from the Decoot who thought to put hands on their work. Ratatek truly was on the edges of known space. It was no wonder their Weequay bounty felt free to raid with impunity so far away from even the center of the outer rim. Iraius acknowledged the calm from her oldest ad, Brack, who had his own ship. They were trying to narrow down the location of the raiders by scanning for Weequay language transmissions in the mountains, preferably without drawing the attention of the warlords running gladiatorial games in what passed for cities on the rocky planet. Hours of scanning later found them deep in the mountains next to a small village, its buildings carved out of the rocks of the surrounding cliffs. They set their ships down there, much to the village's dismay, and headed off into a forest of mushroom-shaped pillars of rock. Brack provided air cover via jetpack, while Eureyus and Zarak covered the ground. They walked for several minutes, triangulating the signals that were bouncing off the cliff walls. They could hear blaster fire. They quickened their pace. When closer, there was the humming Iraius had heard in quite a few holovids over the past months. Past one of the larger pillars was a Jedi perched on top of a large rock. Wedged near the bottom of it was an ad they were obviously protecting. "Break circle around! Zorik, left side!" she ordered over their comms. Her ally sprang into action. She went to the right to take care of any Weequay raiders on that side. Fortunately, their bounty was for dead or alive, so it didn't matter if they accidentally shot him. If the Jedi was startled at their appearance, they didn't show it. Piercing green eyes stared directly at her while the lightsaber kept moving to deflect blaster bolts. Whatever the Jedi saw must have been good, because they turned their back to her again. The little ad had lowered the hands covering their head to peer at her with fascination. They had big pale blue eyes and white skin, though Reyes didn't recognize their species offhand. "Little one, keep your head down!" cried the Jedi. The ad ducked further into the crack where the large stone met the ground. Enough time to admire later. Reyes threw herself into the battle, literally using her armor to block shots as she advanced on the Weequay raiders. She admired the Jedi's control when they bounced any stray shots right back, screaming right past her boucher to strike a Weequay. It was a few more minutes before she got the comm from Brack that all their enemies were down. She ordered him to take their bounty's corpse back to the ship for carbon freezing, while she turned her attention to the Jedi and Attica. She pulled off her boucher so they could see her face. Zorik did the same, next to her. "May the Force be with you," stated Reyes, hoping that phrase would put the Jedi at ease. "I'm Reyes, she, her, and this is my son, Zorik, and my other son, Brack, was providing air support." The Jedi looked more confused than wary, so that was probably good. "I'm Jedi Knight Kynotic, him." He gestured to the ad, who was clinging to the back of his robes, but peeking out at them occasionally. Zorik was grinning at how cute it was. "And this is my Padawan, Asajj Ventress, she, her." "Well met," said Reyes. "Do you need any help with your mission?" She hoped that was the case. "Help? Why would Mandalorians be offering to help me?" The subtle tattoos he had on his chin and the edges of his nose were quite sexy. "Well," the Mandalore said, "it's our duty to offer help to any Jedi we meet on missions, but you're free to decline." She hastened to assure him. As funny as she found that bit of a Knight Admiral ranting about his Mandalorian helpers, she didn't actually want to be the cause of said rant. He was still staring at her. "Have I been stranded here longer than 9 months? In what universe are Mandalorians and Jedi working together?" "Oh!" said Zorik. "Boo! He hasn't read the book or even heard about it!" Reyes grinned. "Well then, let's get you and your Attica back to the Jedi. We'll tell you all about it on our ship." She could have wait to explain the whole thing. After a long moment of hesitation, the Jedi hefted little Asajj onto his hip. "Let's go." Jaster took a sip of his shig and sighed. He'd sent Erta Kriz, Crichton Tassa, and a new Mandalorian accountant to Concordia to investigate Clan Vizsla's finances when he remembered his own promise after the Battle of Concordia to investigate Deathwatch's funding. After he had learned of the Sith a week ago, he had asked them to check if there were signs of Palpatine's presence there, and found out the man owned shares in Concordia's mines. Sifo-Dyas had encouraged him to dig deeper, but the report said that Palpatine's interests seemed to be simply in obtaining Beskar and making money, showing no connection with Deathwatch. Instead, the report suggested that the intergalactic banking clan had, for some reason, been funneling funds into Clan Vizsla, which were carefully earmarked for Deathwatch. There was no reason Jaster could think of for the IBC to be funding a terrorist group on Mandalore, but knowing them, money was at the heart of the move. Maybe Tor Vizsla had promised them shares in the Beskar mines, or maybe Deathwatch were running side missions to scare their customers. He'd need to ask the Jedi if they knew anything, but he sent Erta and Crichton a comm asking them to find out the reasons why before they returned, then shut off his pad so he could finish breakfast. Jaster touched the kata at the center of his chest armor as the yellow pattern across it caught his eye. Django, across the table from him, saw the movement and groaned softly. His ad was visiting during a break on his search for the remnants of Deathwatch. Joe's return engagement gift to Jaster had been the Beskar heart. It was tinged yellow and had the pattern of her ancient Jedi archivist robes etched across it. He had offered both her and Jan a vambrace before they left, not really expecting either to agree. It was probably too soon after their acquaintance for such things, plus it hadn't been approved by the Jedi Council at the time he asked. Still, he hadn't wanted their connection to end without showing his willingness to make it more permanent. Jan was uninterested in things like marriage and declined, but Joe, to his joy, had accepted. They hadn't said the vows yet, because they were working out the logistics of a partially long-distance marriage, but sometime next year, maybe. Speaking of which, he needed to check his messages. Joe had recorded a lecture on the Mandalorian Jedi War for him. He took one last bite of his food before pulling his pad back out. They were in his office this morning rather than their quarters, since he and Django were going to talk logistics right after breakfast. Well, the recording was there, but there was another message flashing bold letters at him. He read it. "What is it?" asked Django. Arla had been and gone already for her customary quick piece of toast before she went off to train or to find Femur. Sometimes both. "Your skin just went white, Bull. I didn't think that was possible." Jaster blandly handed the pad to his ad. "It's a declaration of war by the Hutts on the Mandalorian Jedi Alliance." He considered his shig, then went to grab some of the heaviest liquor he had stashed in his office. "And it demands that we return Tatooine to them." He had time to pour a generous helping into his shake and take a gulp before Django finished reading. Django carefully placed the pad on the desk, then went directly for a swig from the bottle, though he coughed a little after it went down his throat. "When did we conquer Tatooine?" Jaster shook his head. "As far as I know, we didn't, but I know where to start asking." "You mean how they asked for Jedi Master Nico Diaz's head on a platter in order to win the war?" "Yes, and how they say we should dissolve the Makov Ramikad." It would help if Jaster had ever heard of these free bond commandos, but no matter. "You start asking the Verde if they know what's going on. I'll talk to the Jedi." Honestly, a war with the Hutts might be exactly what his people needed. Freeing their slaves was an excellent reason to fight that both his Verde and the Jedi could agree on. However, Jaster would have liked to have been informed before he ended up in a war. He sighed, finished his drink, and went off to find Femur to share the misery. "Ree, could you help me with this?" asked Sangmai Diaz. "Yes," said Ree, hurrying over to where Sangmai was sitting surrounded by bands. The whole clan Diaz lived on Chandrila, and when their operation had gotten too large, Ree had accompanied Nico back there to ask his younger sister, a planetary administrator, to join them on their quest. Apparently, organizing a fleet of Mandalorians and their assault on a planet was very similar to her former job of organizing sports and recreation on Chandrila. It was a bit of a blur how quickly everything had come together. More and more Mandalorians, ones Ree was no longer direct friends with, kept showing up to help him and Diaz take down slaving operations. Then the Bothan Jedi, Master Cole Venari, showed up with her own group, and they somehow had developed divisions. Then John Antilles' fan club, of all things, had sent out a call asking for help taking down the Senex pirates. After that, despite most of the Antilles fan club going back to their own business, they had so many Mandalorians going in and out, they needed some good organization. Hence why Ree had gotten the honor of visiting Clan Diaz and picking up Sangmai. After the organization, they declared themselves the Mavok Ramikad, a mixed group of Mandalorians and Jedi dedicated to freeing slaves, and then helping the freed slaves live the lives they wanted. Ree had been bemused when the Diaz argued for Tatooine as their first attempt at larger operations. It was, to put it frankly, a big ball of sand with no strategic value. Nor were many of the Mavok Ramikad swayed by hearing it had been the home of the Diaz clan millennia ago. But no one had been able to argue when the two Jedi and Sangmai, because the entire clan Diaz was Force-sensitive to one degree or another, told them that Tatooine was of great importance to the Force. So here they were. Gardula was dead, Jabba had fled, leaving behind a rancor that the Diaz treated like a puppy whenever they saw it. Any smaller independent slave owners were encouraged to give up their slaves voluntarily, and if they balked or demanded compensation, they were wiped out. Most of the Ramikad were out there removing slave chips, redistributing wealth, and celebrating the freedom of the planet with the locals and two Jedi. The sounds of the celebration could be faintly heard through the thick walls Tatooine favored. Ree, having a more than passing fondness for Sangmai Diaz, had stayed inside. "What in the world are you trying to do?" he asked as he got closer. All the pads were displaying reams of data with random bits highlighted in other colors. Sangmai sighed and leaned back. "I'm trying to put together a council to rule Tatooine." Ree scanned the whole thing, trying to make it make sense. Lots of slots for former slaves made sense, since they were the largest population on the planet. "You're putting the Tuskens and Jawas on there?" "They are the native inhabitants of this planet, and deserve a say," said Sangmai. Ree could sort of agree on the Tuskens. He'd not been the only baffled Mandalorian when Nico had disappeared into the desert shortly after their arrival on planet to return with a teenage Tusken to observe their operations. Apparently, if the kid liked what he saw, he'd report back favorably to his tribe, who in turn would contact the other Tusken tribes they were allied with. Ree wondered if the kid had already left now that they had succeeded. Surely he had if Sang Mai was including them on a council. How is that seat for the moisture farmers going to take having a Tusken on this council? He asked. Sang Mai frowned. Poorly, of course. We're going to have to move some of the farmers away from their sacred lands. Nola's contacted someone she knows in Agricourt to get advice on good desert plants to introduce to Tatooine, and I've told Nico to find out if the Tuskens are farming black melons, or if they find them simply at random. I'm hoping giving the farmers some more potential crops will distract them from having to relocate. She leaned back in the chair, letting out a sigh. This is all a huge mess, and I'm not even mentioning all the other people who want to kill each other, who we need to form into a functional government. Ree remembered with fondness the time Nico had, with his customary good cheer, told a group of the Ramikad about how his ancestor, Jedi Master Sidronadiath, had died fighting Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars. He had seemed to find it infinitely amusing that Mandalorians were now helping him free their ancestral home planet of Tatooine. Well, Mandalorians and Jedi were trying to kill each other until recently, so it's not impossible, he said. Sang Mai snorted. When you find a Tusken romance novel, let me know. He moved in to give her shoulders a massage. She leaned back into it. You'll figure it out. She twisted and pulled him down for a kiss. We will. Ree had no doubts about that. The events of the last year had proven to him beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jedi and Mandalorians working together could do the impossible. Dang Farron, that's really far out there, said Shin. Osan concurred when the coordinates were pulled up on their map. It was quite a few sectors away, and off the usual hyperspace routes. Where is it? Asked John. He'd typed in the set of coordinates with his eyes closed. Melita! No, Dan. Melita Dan, it's near Tatooine and Naboo, so it should rightfully be Outer Rim, but is somehow a member of the Republic, said Shid, scrolling through some data on his pad. But I suppose Naboo managed to get classified as mid-rim, so a planet not much further out might manage it. Give me that! Said Osan, taking it from him so Shin could start plotting their course. Burr was so used to their destinations being decided by the Force that she hadn't even bothered to wake up for the course change. It's quite a few sectors away from here, he informed John and Aura. Do we need any backup? This says they're in a civil war and have been for decades. John held out his hand to Aura, who took it without hesitation, though it had taken them months to get her and John there. Let us consult the Force. Osan didn't think he'd ever get over how cute it was to see his Anne mimicking John's cross-legged posture on the cockpit's jump seats. In the beginning, she defied John at every turn, trying to get him to hurt her like the Dark Woman had. John had been frustrated, but never even considered such a thing. It had been Osan who explained to John that she was testing their boundaries, and that it was up to them to enforce them until she realized she was safe from abuse. Once they gotten over that hurdle, she had started imitating her body like the cute Tuka kit she was. Osan went back to reading about Melita Dan while they meditated. It honestly sounded like a planet Mandalorians would like, what with their warrior tradition, but they didn't have a warrior leader to unite them like Mandalore did. Instead, all their warriors were honored in grand halls, holograms of the dead urging the survivors to continue fighting. It sounded quite morbid. The whole planet was in danger of losing its status as a member of the Republic if a solution couldn't be found for the conflict between the Melita and the Dan. They couldn't even agree on who to send as a senator for their planet. Well, Ossic. The most recent news articles on the planet said they were openly requesting Jedi mediation. Glancing at his partner to see he was still deep in meditation, Osan sent a query on John's behalf to Yaddle. After the fallout from the report on the Dark Woman's training, Osan had suggested to Vokarache, the Jedi healer he was now in permanent contact with, that John would keep in touch more if he had a designated council member to report to, rather than the full council. Hence, now, John reported to Yaddle, and Yaddle reported John's missions to the council. The trauma of reporting the Dark Woman to the council, however, had made John shy away from contacting the Jedi, so Osan often was the one who sent the actual messages. Beside him, his Jedi stirred. It couldn't be good news. John looked very grim. Aura thankfully didn't seem to have seen something bad. She just looked a little dazed, as she often did after meditating. What did you see, Aura? John had learned to ask questions softly. Children. My age, and a little older, and a little younger. Young. I think that's what they call themselves. They were hiding. John nodded. That agrees with what I was seeing. He turned to Osan. There were children fighting in a plaza. They had some weapons, but I also saw slingshots. The adults fighting them had blaster turrets. John didn't say anything more, but he didn't have to. It would have been a massacre, he saw. Aura clutched at the side of John's robes. She understood the implication. Sick. Well, looks like we need some backup, said Osan. Shin was nodding along. I can take the fan club, said Shin. Aren't the outskirts near Tatooine? I think they're rather busy with the Freedom War, said John, but any who can help us save the children will be welcome. There might be a Jedi heading there already, said Osan. I've sent a comm to Yaddle to ask. John gave him a quick kiss on the side of his lips in thanks. Then he froze. The fan club's going to record us saving all the children, are they? John asked. Definitely, said Shin. At the same time, Osan nodded. John sighed and leaned his head up against Osan's shoulder. Osan patted his side in comfort, trying to hold back his laughter. John was never getting away from his high ranking on the Jedi net. We need to give Darth a name. I'm having trouble doing anything other than laugh when I see Darth What's-His-Name written in the text, said Talon. Mari was doggedly pecking one character at a time on her pad, but paused to look at him. It's such a complicated question, though. We have to be careful not to copy or even be close to any of the hundreds of Sith active in the Old Republic, and it needs to be a proper Sith name. The nearest Adegate entered the room, hovering near the door, saw hidden behind Stella. What do you need, Steak-Up? He asked. Mary glanced up to smile at them, but then immediately went back to staring at the pad. She could get very focused on the task if left to her own. Can I get sauce and blue milk? She asked. Of course, said Talon warmly. You don't need to ask unless the pitcher is too heavy. All we ask is that if we're running low, you add it to the list on the conservator. Stella nodded eagerly before heading off to the kitchen, Saw crowding near her back. It broke Talon's heart a little how suspicious the younger sibling was of them, but he knew he'd come around one of these days. Considering how long it was taking the Ade to warm up to them, Talon counted it a miracle that Feemore had been able to convince them to even come with him that time. Mary frowned down at her pad. As I was saying, it also has to conform to proper Sith naming conventions, which generally seems to be either a name reminiscent of a violent or dangerous word, or a truncating a violent word. So Malik is similar to malice, and Kralls are, of course, vicious creatures, etc. Well, our Sith is creating shadow warriors, right? So what are some old words for shadows or darkness? She was searching for words on her pad. Nox is already taken. Tenebros might work, or Calignus. Darth Kali feels like a more cheerful word in my head than a dark word, said Talon. Agreed. Well, I don't see Tenebros on the list of Sith from the temple, so I think an obscure old standard word for darkness is the way to go. All right. Darth Tenebros it is, said Talon. Several sectors away, Darth Plagueis, former apprentice to Darth Tenebros, raised his head. He felt a disturbance in the Force. Perhaps it was time to check on his apprentice and the galaxy at large. End of How a Romance Novel Saved the Galaxy by Ariana De Rote. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thank you for listening. Also, thanks to the members who support my channel every week.